On a cold Tuesday morning, a worn-down father is just trying to get his daughter to school when the song in his heart catches the ear of a man who could change everything. But what starts as a dream turns into a test of faith. Behind the bright studio lights, he hears whispers ugly words that make him question if this chance is real, or just another way to take his voice away. As the world finally starts to listen, a bigger choice rises before him. Take the money and vanish, or risk it all to sing the truth. Because when the system says no, and a child says, don't give up, the fight isn't just for music, it's for dignity, for hope, for a future. What will he choose when everything he's ever wanted comes with a price he can't afford to pay? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The morning air was crisp enough to make Eli Carter's breath visible in small, wispy clouds. He pulled his well-worn brown jacket tighter around his shoulders, the familiar scratch of the fabric offering little warmth against the chill of this early Tuesday morning in Willow Creek. The metal bench at the bus stop felt cold, even through his work pants, but he'd learned long ago to be grateful for any chance to rest his feet before a long day of cleaning offices. His deep voice rumbled softly as he hummed the opening lines of "Wade in the Water," a gospel tune his grandmother had sung to him countless times on mornings just like this one. The melody brought back memories of her small kitchen, warm with the scent of buttermilk biscuits and the sound of her voice rising above the sizzle of breakfast cooking. "Daddy, you're doing it again," Naomi said with a giggle, adjusting the straps of her purple backpack. She stood nearby, bouncing on her toes to keep warm, her braids swaying with each movement. "You know you can't help singing, even this early." Eli smiled at his daughter, his heart warming at the sight of her bright eyes and playful grin. "Can't help what comes natural, baby girl. Your grandma always said music was good for the soul, no matter the hour." "Did great-grandma really sing every morning too?" Naomi asked, though she'd heard the story dozens of times before. "Every single morning," Eli confirmed, taking a sip from his thermos. The coffee inside was still hot enough to send a welcome warmth through his chest. She'd be up before the sun, singing while she cooked, while she cleaned, while she did just about everything, said it was her way of talking to God. Naomi plopped down beside him on the bench, her school shoes barely touching the ground. "I wish I could have met her. Was she as good a singer as you?" Eli chuckled, the sound deep and rich. "Better. Much better. She could make the angels jealous with that voice of hers." He took another sip of coffee, letting the melody fill his throat again, this time singing the words softly. "Wade in the water. Wade in the water. Children, wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water." His voice carried across the empty street, full of soul and warmth that seemed to push back against the morning chill. A few early birds stopped to listen. Mrs. Johnson pausing her sweep of her store's front step, and old Mr. Peters slowing his daily walk to nod in appreciation. "See what I mean?" Naomi said, nudging her father's arm. "You get everybody to stop and listen, just like that." Eli shook his head, embarrassed by the attention. "Just keeping warm, that's all." But he couldn't help continuing the song, the verses flowing naturally as they always had. "See that host all dressed in white? God's gonna trouble the water. The leader looks like the Israelite. God's gonna trouble the water." As he sang, memories of his late wife Maria flooded back. She'd loved to hear him sing, always telling him he was wasting his gift, cleaning offices and working at the hardware store. But bills needed paying, and dreams of music careers were luxury items he couldn't afford, especially not since she'd passed. Naomi needed stability more than her daddy needed spotlight. "You should sing at church again this Sunday," Naomi suggested, her face serious. "Pastor Williams keeps asking, and I know everybody would love it." "We'll see, baby girl. We'll see." Eli checked his watch. The bus would be coming soon. He could already hear its familiar rumble a few blocks away. The morning sun was starting to peek through the clouds, casting long shadows across the cracked sidewalk. A few more early morning workers had joined them at the bus stop, nodding hello as they checked their phones or sipped their own coffees. Eli continued humming, softer now, but still clear enough to be heard. The melody seemed to dance with the steam rising from his thermos, twisting up into the cool morning air. He'd learned this particular arrangement from his grandmother, with all its little flourishes and soul-deep turns that made it uniquely hers, and now his. "Your voice sounds extra good today," Naomi observed, leaning her head against his arm. "Must be the cold air. Or maybe it's just having my best fan right here beside me," Eli replied, wrapping an arm around her shoulders and pulling her close. The sound of an approaching vehicle made them both look up, expecting to see the bus. Instead, a sleek black sedan rolled slowly past the bus stop, its engine purring quietly. The car's windows were tinted, but Eli could make out the silhouette of someone inside turning to look their way. The sedan continued a few more feet, then smoothly pulled over to the curb. The engine cut off, and the driver's door opened. A white-haired man in an expensive-looking tailored coat stepped out, his polished shoes clicking against the pavement as he turned to face the bus stop. He stood there for a moment, watching Eli with an expression of intense interest, a curious smile playing at the corners of his mouth. His presence seemed to change the very air around the bus stop, like a shift in atmospheric pressure before a storm. Eli instinctively pulled Naomi a little closer, though the stranger's smile appeared genuine enough. The white-haired man's eyes never left Eli's face, and his expression held something that looked almost like wonder, as if he'd just discovered something precious in the most unexpected place. The morning chill suddenly felt more pronounced as Eli met the stranger's gaze, wondering what could have made this well-dressed man stop his expensive car at a humble bus stop on an ordinary Tuesday morning in Willow Creek. The sleek black sedan pulled up to the curb with a quiet purr, its polished surface reflecting the pale morning light. The white-haired man who stepped out carried himself with the confident air of someone used to commanding attention. His tailored coat and leather shoes spoke of wealth, making him look distinctly out of place at this humble bus stop. Eli's humming faded as the stranger approached, his weathered hands tightening around his thermos. Naomi edged closer to her father, curiosity written across her young face. "Don't stop on my account," the man said, his voice carrying a hint of southern charm beneath its authority. "I've been driving around this neighborhood for 20 minutes trying to find where that sound was coming from." He extended his hand. "Charles Whitmore. I used to produce records back in the day." Eli hesitated before accepting the handshake. "Eli Carter. This is my daughter, Naomi." "Aye, Mr. Whitmore," Naomi chirped, her natural friendliness winning out over any shyness. Charles's eyes crinkled at the corners as he smiled at her, but his attention quickly returned to Eli. "That voice of yours. It's pure gold. What was that you were singing?" Sounded like old gospel with a blues twist. A nervous chuckle escaped Eli's lips. "Just something my grandmother used to sing." He shifted uncomfortably on the bench, wondering if this was some kind of elaborate prank. People didn't just stop their fancy cars to talk about gospel music at bus stops. "Daddy sings all the time," Naomi volunteered proudly. "At church, while he's cooking, when he thinks I'm sleeping." She grinned as Eli gave her a gentle nudge. "Is that right?" Charles leaned against his car, seeming in no hurry despite the early hour. "You ever record anything, Mr. Carter?" "No, sir. Just sing for the joy of it." Eli glanced down the street, hoping to see the bus approaching. This conversation was starting to feel surreal. "That's a waste of a gift," Charles said bluntly. "I've been in this business 40 years, worked with some of the biggest names in Nashville and Memphis. What I just heard? That's something special." Naomi's eyes grew wide. "See, Daddy? I always told you you're amazing." Eli felt his face warm despite the morning chill. "Mr. Whitmore, I appreciate the compliment, but—" "Let me record you," Charles interrupted. "Just a demo, professional studio, my treat." The laugh that burst from Eli's throat was tinged with disbelief. "Look, I don't know what kind of—" "Daddy!" Naomi tugged at his sleeve, her expression earnest. "You have to at least think about it." Charles reached into his coat and withdrew a silver card case. "I understand your skepticism, Mr. Carter. Been in this business long enough to know how it looks when a stranger makes big promises. He pulled out a cream-colored business card, the morning light catching the embossed lettering. "But I'm serious as a heart attack. That voice of yours, it's the real deal." Eli stared at the card being offered to him. The name Charles Whitmore was printed in elegant silver letters, along with a phone number and the title, Producer Emeritus, Riverside Records. "Take it," Charles urged. "Call me when you're ready to talk. No pressure, no strings attached. Just an old producer who knows talent when he hears it." The distant rumble of the approaching bus filled the morning air. Eli reached out slowly and took the card, its thick paper feeling unexpectedly heavy in his hand. "Call me," Charles repeated, stepping back toward his car. "I'm serious." As the bus pulled up with a hiss of brakes, Eli slipped the card into his jacket pocket. His fingers lingered on it for a moment as he gathered his thermos and stood. Naomi was practically bouncing with excitement as they boarded the bus, but Eli's mind was spinning, unsure whether to believe in this strange moment of possibility or dismiss it as just another empty promise in a world full of them. Through the bus window, he watched Charles Whitmore's black sedan pull away from the curb, disappearing into the early morning traffic of Willow Creek. The business card seemed to burn in his pocket, a small rectangle of possibility that he wasn't quite ready to believe in. "Your grandmother was right," the elderly woman who always sat in the front seat called out as Eli and Naomi passed by. "Music is good for the soul, and sometimes it brings angels in fancy cars." Naomi giggled at this, but Eli just smiled politely and guided her toward their usual seats. As they settled in for the ride, his daughter's eyes shone with excitement she couldn't contain. "Daddy," she whispered, though her whisper was loud enough for half the bus to hear, "you're going to call him, right? Promise me you'll at least think about it?" Eli squeezed her hand gently. "We'll see, baby girl, we'll see." The bus lurched forward, carrying them toward another ordinary day, or what was supposed to be an ordinary day, before a retired record producer had appeared like some kind of musical fairy godfather at their regular bus stop. Eli's fingers found the card in his pocket again, tracing its embossed edges as the familiar streets of Willow Creek rolled past the window. The woman's words about angels in fancy cars echoed in his mind, mixing with the memory of his grandmother's voice and the gospel tune he'd been humming just minutes ago. It all seemed too convenient, too much like the kind of story people told about how stars were discovered. Things like that didn't happen to people like him, a widowed janitor trying to make ends meet. Yet there was something about Charles Whitmore's direct gaze, something in the way he'd listened so intently to that simple morning hymn that made Eli wonder. The card in his pocket was real enough, its edges sharp and clean against his fingertips. Whatever this morning's strange encounter meant, at least he had proof it wasn't just a dream. Steam rose from 2 bowls of homemade chili on the small kitchen table, the rich aroma filling their modest apartment. The ancient overhead light cast a warm yellow glow over Eli and Naomi as they sat down for their evening meal. A few homework papers were pushed to one side of the scratched wooden surface, and a half-empty bottle of hot sauce stood between their bowls. "But Daddy, you have to call him," Naomi insisted, her spoon hovering halfway to her mouth. "Mr. Whitmore is a real record producer. I looked him up on my phone during lunch break." Eli stirred his chili absently, the business card from that morning burning a hole in his jacket pocket where he'd stuffed it. "Baby girl, it's not that simple. I've got the cleaning job at the office building and the weekend shifts at the hardware store. We need that money. But what if this is our chance? Like in those movies where someone gets discovered and everything changes?" Naomi's eyes sparkled with the pure optimism that only a 10-year-old could maintain. "Life isn't a movie, sweetheart." Eli's voice was gentle but firm. He took a bite of chili, savoring the familiar comfort of his mother's recipe. "Besides, men like that don't just stop at bus stops to hand out record deals." "Why not?" Naomi challenged, putting down her spoon. "You have the best voice in the whole world. Grandmother always said you got her mama's gift." The mention of his grandmother made Eli's chest tighten. He could still hear her voice, rich and deep, singing those old spirituals while she worked in her garden. That was different times, different dreams, he said softly. Mom would want you to try. Naomi's words hung in the air between them. Eli set his spoon down, studying his daughter's determined face. Sarah would have encouraged him. She always had. Even during her final days in the hospital, she'd made him promise not to let his music die with her. Listen, baby, he said, reaching across to touch Naomi's hand. I know you mean well, but pipe dreams don't pay the bills. We've got rent coming up, and your new shoes for school. But what if it works? Naomi persisted. What if God sent Mr. Whitmore to that bus stop for a reason? Naomi, you always tell me to trust in God's plan. She pressed on. Maybe this is part of it. You didn't see how Mr. Whitmore looked when he heard you singing. Like he'd found something really special. Eli pushed back from the table and carried his bowl to the sink. The dishes from breakfast still sat there. He'd been too rushed this morning to wash them. Just like every morning. Just like every evening. The endless cycle of work and worry and trying to keep their little world together. I can't risk getting my hopes up, he said, more to himself than to Naomi. Not now. Not when you need me to be focused on what's real. But your music is real, Daddy. Naomi came up beside him, wrapping her arms around his waist. I see how happy you are when you sing, like you're finally being yourself. Eli looked down at his daughter, seeing so much of Sarah in her face, the same determination, the same faith in possibilities. When did you get so wise, huh? I learned from the best. She grinned up at him. Just promise you'll think about it, please? He sighed, running a hand over his face. I'll think about it. But no promises beyond that, okay? Okay. Naomi bounced on her toes, clearly counting this as a victory. I'm going to do my homework now, and you should do the dishes before they pile up again. Eli chuckled, watching her skip back to the table to gather her papers. Yes, ma'am. Later that evening, after Naomi had gone to bed, Eli sat at the kitchen table with Charles Whitmore's business card in front of him. The embossed letters caught the light. Whitmore Productions, in elegant script, with a phone number and email address below. His fingers traced the raised letters as memories flooded back, singing in the church choir, performing at local festivals with Sarah cheering him on. His grandmother's proud smile when he'd mastered one of her old songs. But those memories belonged to a different life, before responsibility and reality had taken over. He was about to put the card away when Naomi padded into the kitchen in her pajamas, claiming she needed water. She watched him tuck the card into his jacket pocket. Don't forget to think about it tomorrow, she said, giving him a knowing look. I won't forget, baby. Now back to bed. After she left, Eli began preparing his lunch for the next day. He pulled out his worn lunchbox, the one Sarah had given him years ago, and packed a sandwich and an apple. When he turned to get a napkin, he heard the soft sound of bare feet on linoleum. Naomi Carter, I said bed. He turned back to find the kitchen empty, but his lunchbox was now closed. Opening it again, he found Charles Whitmore's business card tucked carefully beside his sandwich. A note in Naomi's childish handwriting was wrapped around it. Just in case you need a reminder to believe in miracles, love, your biggest fan. The afternoon sun beat down on the grimy alley behind Joe's Diner, where metal trash bins lined the cracked concrete wall. Eli Carter sat on an overturned milk crate during his break, his work apron still dusted with flour from the morning shift. The diner's back door was propped open, letting out the sounds of clattering dishes and sizzling grills. He pulled Charles Whitmore's business card from his wallet for what felt like the 100th time. The cream-colored cardstock had grown soft at the edges from his constant handling. The embossed letters caught the sunlight. Charles Whitmore Productions, in elegant script, followed by a phone number. Eli's grandmother's voice echoed in his mind. When the Lord opens a door, child, you best peek through it at least. He'd been running from that voice for 2 days now, making excuses about being too busy or too tired to make the call. His fingers trembled slightly as he pulled out his old flip phone. The numbers were worn on the keypad, But he carefully dialed, his heart thumping against his ribs. He almost hoped it would go to voicemail. The phone rang once, twice. Charles Whitmore speaking. The voice was warm and clear. Eli's throat went dry. "Mr. Whitmore, this is Eli Carter. We met at the bus stop a couple days ago." "Eli," Charles cut in, his voice brightening immediately. "I was hoping you'd call. That voice of yours hasn't left my mind since Tuesday morning. Well, I've been thinking about what you said," Eli managed, tugging at his collar. "About recording?" "Yes, absolutely." Papers shuffled in the background. "I have a home studio. Professional setup. We could do a proper demo, see what we capture." Eli glanced at his watch. His shift would end in 20 minutes, and he'd need to pick up Naomi from her after-school program soon. "Sir, I appreciate the offer, but I work 2 jobs. My schedule's pretty tight." "What about Saturday?" Charles asked without hesitation. "I'm free all day. We could start around 10, work for a few hours, no pressure, just see what happens." A saw-stained order ticket fluttered past Eli's feet, caught in the alley's breeze. Saturday was usually laundry day, grocery shopping, helping Naomi with her science project. But her words from 2 nights ago rang in his ears. "Maybe God sent him, Daddy." "Saturday," Eli repeated, his voice steadier now. I could probably do that." "Excellent." Charles's enthusiasm was infectious. "Let me give you the address. It's just off Mason Road, that big stone house with the black gates. You can't miss it." Eli scribbled the address on the back of an old receipt with a stubby pencil from his apron pocket. The paper was slightly greasy, but the numbers were legible. 10 o'clock on Saturday, Charles confirmed. "And Eli? Bring that gospel tune you were singing at the bus stop? The one about morning light?" "Yes, sir, I know the one." It was his grandmother's favorite, the song she'd sing while making Sunday breakfast. "Perfect. See you then." The line went dead, and Eli stared at his phone for a long moment. The back door creaked, and Joe's voice bellowed out, "Carter, table 6 needs their check." "Coming," Eli called back, tucking the phone and business card away. He stood up, brushed off his apron, and took a deep breath. The air smelled like French fries and possibility. The rest of his shift passed in a blur of coffee refills and burger orders. By the time he picked up Naomi from the community center, his mind was still spinning with what had just happened. Their small apartment welcomed them home with familiar creaks and shadows. Eli moved around the kitchen, warming up leftover casserole, while Naomi chatted about her day at school. The ancient microwave hummed, and the overhead light flickered its usual rhythm. And then Sarah said her science project might be about volcanoes, but I told her, everyone does volcanoes. Naomi was saying, setting out their mismatched plates. "I think I want to do something about sound waves instead." Eli placed the steaming casserole on the table, then sat down heavily in his chair. "Speaking of sound," he began, watching his daughter's face carefully. "I made that phone call today." Naomi's fork clattered against her plate. "To Mr. Whitmore, the record producer?" Her eyes grew wide. "What did he say?" "What did you say? Are you going to sing for him?" "Slow down, baby girl," Eli chuckled, serving her a portion of casserole. "Yes, I called him. And we have an appointment. Saturday morning, at his home studio." The squeal that erupted from Naomi nearly rattled the windows. She jumped up from her chair, her braids bouncing. "I knew it! I knew you'd call him! Oh, Daddy, this is so exciting!" She spun around and darted toward the hallway. "We have to find your nice shirt, the blue one." "Hold on now," Eli called after her. "Your dinner's getting cold." But Naomi was already in her room, rummaging through the shared closet space. Her voice carried back to the kitchen, muffled but excited. "It's in here somewhere. You have to look professional, Daddy." The city bus lurched to a stop at the corner of Maple Grove, a tree-lined street where houses seemed to grow bigger with each passing block. Eli Carter adjusted his freshly pressed button-down shirt, the nicest one he owned, and took Naomi's hand as they stepped down onto the sidewalk. Is this really where he lives, Daddy? Naomi's eyes were wide as she clutched her little backpack, filled with her homework, just in case. That's what the address says, baby. Eli double-checked the numbers on his phone against the elegant brass digits mounted beside each driveway. They walked past homes with 3-car garages and professionally landscaped gardens until they reached number 1542. A black wrought iron gate stood open, revealing a circular driveway that curved around a burbling stone fountain. The house itself was a sprawling ranch-style mansion with large windows and cream-colored stone walls. Eli hesitated at the entrance, his hand tightening around Naomi's. This neighborhood was a world away from their modest apartment complex across town. Maybe we should. Don't you dare, Daddy, Naomi interrupted, tugging him forward. We didn't ride the bus for an hour just to stand here. A smile tugged at his lips. Sometimes, his daughter's determination was the only thing that kept him moving forward. They made their way up the curved driveway, their shoes crunching on the perfectly maintained gravel. Before they could reach the front door, Charles emerged from around the side of the house, wearing khakis and a casual blue sweater. Eli, right on time. He strode toward them with his hand extended. And this must be the famous Naomi I heard about. Naomi beamed, shaking his hand with the poise of someone twice her age. Nice to meet you, Mr. Whitmore. Daddy says you're going to help him make music. That's the plan, Charles chuckled. Come on around back. That's where all the magic happens. They followed Charles along a stone path that wound through perfectly manicured flower beds. Behind the main house stood what looked like a separate building made almost entirely of glass and steel. Solar panels gleamed on its slanted roof. Welcome to my studio, Charles said, punching a code into a keypad by the door. Built it 5 years ago when I semi-retired. Couldn't quite give up the producing life completely. The door opened with a soft hiss, and cool air washed over them. Eli's breath caught as they stepped inside. The main room was larger than their entire apartment, with wood-paneled walls and ceiling panels that looked like floating clouds. Sophisticated recording equipment lined one wall, and in the center of the room stood a beautiful grand piano, its black surface reflecting the morning light that streamed through the windows. This is... Eli struggled to find words. Amazing. Naomi finished for him, her voice echoing slightly in the space. Charles grinned. Wait till you hear how good it sounds in here. He gestured to a young man sitting at the mixing board, who barely looked up from his phone. That's Jake, my assistant. He handles the technical side of things. Jake gave a half-hearted wave, his eyes flicking over Eli and Naomi before returning to his screen. Let me show you the recording booth, Charles continued, leading them toward a door with a glowing red light above it. State-of-the-art soundproofing, perfect acoustics. As they passed the mixing station, Jake's voice carried just loud enough to hear, Another charity project? Guess we're filling quotas now. Eli's steps faltered. The words hit him like a splash of cold water, dampening the wonder he'd been feeling. He felt Naomi's hand tighten in his, and he knew she'd heard it too. His jaw clenched, but he kept walking, keeping his expression neutral even as his shoulders tensed. Charles was still talking, pointing out various features of the studio, seemingly unaware of what had just happened. Eli nodded along, but the excitement that had been building all morning had drained away, replaced by a familiar weight in his chest. He'd been right to hesitate at the gate. This world, with its pristine lawns and glass studios, wasn't meant for people like him, no matter how good his voice might be. Naomi squeezed his hand again, and when he looked down, she gave him a fierce look that seemed to say, "Don't you dare give up." She pulled him forward into the recording booth, her chin held high, even as Jake's words hung in the air behind them. Charles gestured toward the vocal booth, its padded walls and suspended microphone gleaming under soft LED lights. Ready to give it a try? Eli shifted his weight from one foot to the other, studying the professional setup through the glass partition. Everything looked expensive and delicate. I don't know about this. Daddy, Naomi piped up from the leather couch where she'd settled with her backpack. Remember what Grandma used to say about hiding your light under a bushel? A smile tugged at Eli's lips. His daughter had inherited his late wife's way of cutting straight through his doubts. He nodded and stepped into the booth, the door closing behind him with a soft click. Charles's voice came through the headphones. Just relax. Pretend you're back at that bus stop, singing to yourself. Eli adjusted the headphones, their weight unfamiliar on his ears. The microphone loomed before him, suspended in its cradle like a mechanical spider. Through the glass, he could see Naomi giving him 2 thumbs up. What would you like to sing? Charles asked through the intercom. Eli cleared his throat. There's an old hymn my grandmother taught me. His eye is on the sparrow. Perfect. Take your time. I'll count you in when you're ready. Closing his eyes, Eli thought of early mornings in his grandmother's kitchen, the smell of coffee and biscuits, her voice strong and sure as she taught him the old songs. He took a deep breath, letting the memory wash over him. Charles's voice came soft through the headphones. 3, 2, 1. The first note trembled slightly, but as Eli continued, his voice grew stronger, filling the booth with deep, soulful tones. The familiar melody flowed through him, each word carrying the weight of years of joy and sorrow, faith and struggle. Through the glass, he could see Naomi sitting forward on the couch, her homework forgotten in her lap. Her eyes shone with pride, and for a moment she looked so much like her mother that his voice nearly caught. But he pushed through, letting the music carry him. The acoustics in the booth were incredible. Every note crystal clear, every breath perfectly captured. As he sang, the world outside fell away. He forgot about Jake's snide remarks, forgot about the bills piling up at home, forgot about everything except the song itself. When the last note faded, silence filled the booth. Eli opened his eyes to see Charles leaning forward at the mixing board, his expression intense. Even Jake had stopped scrolling on his phone and was staring at the monitors. That was, Charles pressed the intercom button. Hold on, let me play it back for you. Eli stepped out of the booth, and Naomi immediately ran to hug him. That was beautiful, Daddy. Charles adjusted some settings on the board, and suddenly Eli's voice filled the studio. It was strange hearing himself through the professional speakers, the sound richer and fuller than he'd imagined. His grandmother's influence was there in every run and turn, but there was something else too, something uniquely his own. When the playback ended, Charles spun in his chair to face them. That's it. That's the one. His eyes were bright with excitement. The raw emotion, the authenticity. You can't teach that. This is exactly what I heard at the bus stop. He turned back to the equipment, fingers flying over the controls. Let me burn this onto a disc for you. People need to hear this. Naomi squeezed Eli's hand. See? I told you God sent him to that bus stop. Eli watched as Charles inserted a blank CD into a drive, his movements quick and precise. Despite the morning's earlier tension, hope flickered in his chest. Maybe Naomi was right. Maybe this was more than just chance. The disk drive hummed, and Charles carefully placed the finished CD in a clear case. He handed it to Eli with the same reverence someone might handle a precious artifact. Your first studio recording, he said with a warm smile. Keep it safe. The morning sun streamed through the tall hotel windows, casting long shadows across the freshly mopped lobby floor. Eli worked methodically, pushing his mop in smooth figure-8 patterns. The familiar motion had become almost meditative over his years of early morning shifts. Mrs. Henderson, the head housekeeper, walked past with her clipboard. Looking good, Eli. Don't forget the service hallway when you're done here. Yes, ma'am, he replied with a gentle smile. He'd already planned to tackle that area next. Routine was comforting, knowing exactly what needed doing and when to do it. In his pocket, his old flip phone began to vibrate. Eli rarely got calls during work hours, except occasionally from Naomi's school. He propped the mop against a nearby column and fished out the phone, checking the caller ID. Charles Whitmore. His heart skipped a beat. It had been 3 days since the recording session, and though Charles had seemed enthusiastic, Eli had been trying not to get his hopes up too high. He flipped the phone open. "Hello? Eli?" Charles's voice crackled through the speaker, breathless and excited. "I've got news. Big news." Eli gripped the phone tighter, moving closer to the windows where the reception was better. "What kind of news, Mr. Whitmore?" "Charles, please. And it's about the demo. I sent it to a few industry contacts, just to test the waters, you understand. And Eli, you're not going to believe this. Summit Records wants the song." The words hit Eli like a physical force. Summit Records. One of the biggest labels in the country. He steadied himself against the wall, barely noticing Mrs. People Henderson's curious glance as she passed by again. They want my song?" His voice came out barely above a whisper. There was a slight pause on the other end. When Charles spoke again, his tone had shifted, becoming more measured. "Well, yes. They love the song. The composition, the arrangement. They think it could be a hit." Something in Charles' careful phrasing made Eli's stomach tighten. "But," Charles sighed, "but they want to have it performed by one of their existing artists. A younger performer, someone more marketable to their target demographic." The sunlight suddenly felt too bright, too harsh. Eli's free hand clenched into a fist at his side. "You mean someone white, Eli?" Charles's voice softened with genuine regret. "I fought for you. I want you to know that. But they're offering a very generous deal. You'd get full writing credit, your name on the album, and the payout. Well, it's substantial. The kind of money that could make a real difference for you and Naomi." The mention of his daughter's name sent a jolt through Eli's chest. He thought of their small apartment, the second-hand furniture, the way Naomi never complained when he couldn't afford the new shoes she wanted or the field trips her friends were going on. "How substantial?" he heard himself ask, even as something inside him recoiled at the question. Charles named a figure that made Eli's knees weak. It was more money than he made in 2 years of cleaning floors and serving tables. "They need an answer by tomorrow morning," Charles continued. "I know it's not ideal, but sometimes you have to take what the industry offers and use it as a stepping stone. This could open doors, Eli. Get your foot in the gate as a songwriter, build connections." Eli barely heard the rest. His eyes had fixed on a puddle of water from his mop, reflecting the morning light in abstract patterns. In its rippling surface, he saw his grandmother's face, heard her voice singing those old songs in church. Songs born from struggle and pain, but also from dignity and an unshakable faith in what was right. The mop stood propped against the column where he'd left it, water slowly dripping from its strings onto the polished tile floor. Eli stood frozen, phone pressed to his ear, staring at that small puddle as Charles continued to outline the deal's benefits. In the reflection, he could see himself clearly. A man in a janitor's uniform, holding a flip phone in one hand, while the weight of a life-changing decision pressed down on his shoulders. The porch light cast a dim yellow glow across the weathered wooden boards. Eli sat in the old rocking chair, wrapped in Naomi's purple fleece blanket, the one with unicorns that she'd outgrown but couldn't bear to give away. The night air held a slight chill, carrying the promise of rain in its gentle breeze. He closed his eyes, letting the demo's melody wash over him again. His grandmother's voice seemed to echo in his memory, teaching him the song when he was barely older than Naomi. The way she'd cup his chin, saying, "Baby, when you sing, you're telling your story. Don't ever let nobody tell it for you." Summit Records wanted his song, but not his voice. The thought sat heavy in his chest, like a stone he couldn't shift. They'd offered good money, more than he made in 6 months of cleaning floors and serving tables. Money that could give Naomi the opportunities she deserved, maybe even start a college fund. The screen door creaked softly behind him. Small feet padded across the wooden boards, and he didn't need to turn to know it was Naomi in her pink pajamas and fuzzy socks. Can't sleep either? He asked, making room as she climbed onto his lap like she used to when she was smaller. I heard you come out here, she said, settling against his chest. You're thinking about Mr. Charles's phone call, aren't you? Eli smiled despite himself. Sometimes he forgot how perceptive his daughter could be. Yeah, baby, I am. What exactly did they offer you, Daddy? Her voice was quiet but earnest. He shifted in the chair, the old wood groaning beneath him. They want to give the song to someone else to sing, someone younger. He paused, the words sticking in his throat. Someone white. Naomi was quiet for a long moment, processing this. The crickets chirped their evening symphony, and somewhere down the street, a dog barked at nothing in particular. But it's your song, she finally said. Your voice made Mr. Charles stop his car that morning. They'd give us good money for it, though. Eli tried to keep his voice neutral, not wanting to influence her thoughts. Enough to maybe move to a bigger place. Get you that new computer for school you've been wanting. Naomi sat up straighter, turning to face him with that serious expression she sometimes got, the one that made her look so much like her mother, it almost hurt. Daddy, remember what you told me when I wanted to quit choir because Jenny Thompson said I wasn't good enough? What's that, baby? You said God gives us gifts for a reason, and it's not just about being the best, it's about being true to who we are. Eli's throat tightened. Trust his daughter to throw his own words back at him when he needed to hear them most. Daddy, she continued, her small hand finding his in the darkness, maybe God sent Mr. Charles for a reason, not just for the money, but because your voice is supposed to be heard. The wisdom in her words struck him deeply. He thought about that morning at the bus stop, how Charles had appeared out of nowhere, drawn by something in his voice. Was it just coincidence, or was there more to it? A cool breeze rustled through the crepe myrtle trees lining their small yard. Eli pulled the blanket tighter around them both, breathing in the familiar scent of fabric softener and the lingering trace of Naomi's strawberry shampoo. Your mama used to say everything happens for a reason, he said softly, remembering how Sarah had faced even her illness with unwavering faith. She'd probably say the same thing you are right now. Naomi nodded against his chest. She would, and she'd want you to keep singing, Daddy, just like Grandma taught you. The memory of his grandmother's weathered hands guiding him through those old spirituals flooded back. The way she'd close her eyes when she sang, like she was reaching back through time to touch something sacred. How she'd tell him that their music wasn't just notes and words. It was the story of their people, their pain, their joy, their faith. If I give away my voice, baby girl, what's left of me? The words came out barely above a whisper, more to himself than to Naomi. The first drops of rain began to fall, pattering softly on the porch steps. The sound was gentle, almost musical, like God himself was keeping time with their thoughts. The morning sun filtered through the kitchen curtains, casting warm patterns across the worn linoleum floor. Eli sat at the kitchen table, his work uniform already on, staring at his phone. Naomi bustled around making breakfast, humming the same gospel tune they'd recorded in Charles's studio. You're going to be late if you don't make that call soon, she said, sliding a plate of slightly burnt toast in front of him. Her eyes held that mix of worry and hope he'd seen so much lately. Eli picked up his phone, then set it down again. What if we're making a mistake, baby girl? That money could change things for us. Naomi pulled out the chair across from him and sat down, folding her hands like she was about to give a serious lecture. Remember what Grandma used to say about your voice being a gift from God? Yeah, Eli said softly, a small smile tugging at his lips. Well, then it's not really ours to sell, is it? Eli looked at his daughter, really looked at her. Sometimes he saw so much of her mother in her, that same quiet wisdom that could cut right through his doubts. He picked up the phone again, and this time dialed Charles's number. The phone rang 3 times before Charles's warm southern drawl came through. Eli, I was hoping to hear from you. Morning, Charles. Eli's voice came out steadier than he expected. I've been thinking about that offer from Summit Records. And? There was a note of anticipation in Charles's voice. Eli took a deep breath. I appreciate everything you've done for us, truly, but I can't take their offer. A moment of silence stretched across the line. Then Charles chuckled. You know what? I had a feeling you'd say that. You did? Son, I've been in this business 40 years. Met all kinds of artists. But the ones with real staying power, they're the ones who know exactly who they are and won't compromise on that. Eli felt something loosen in his chest. Thank you for understanding. Oh, I more than understand, Charles said, and Eli could hear the smile in his voice. In fact, I've got another proposition for you. How would you feel about recording an independent album? Naomi, who had been pretending not to eavesdrop, perked up at this. An album? Eli repeated. I don't know the first thing about making an album. That's what you've got me for, Charles said. Look, I've got the studio, the equipment, and more importantly, I've got the time. We do this right. Build it from the ground up. Your voice, your way. Eli glanced at Naomi, who was practically bouncing in her chair with excitement. It would take time, he said carefully, and I've still got my jobs to think about. We work around your schedule, Charles assured him. Nights, weekends, whatever works. This isn't about rushing to market, Eli. This is about creating something real. The sincerity in Charles's voice touched something deep in Eli's heart. This wasn't the slick promise of instant success the label had dangled. This was something else. Something that felt more like the truth. I'd need to think about it, Eli said. But he could feel himself already leaning toward yes. Take all the time you need, Charles replied. But Eli, for what it's worth, I think you're making the right choice. Both in turning down Summit and in considering this path. Eli looked at his daughter again, saw the hope shining in her eyes. How about I come by after my shift today? We can talk details. Perfect. I'll have Martha make her famous sweet tea. They worked out the time, and as Eli hung up the phone, he felt lighter than he had in days. The weight of the label's offer, the temptation of easy money, it all seemed to fade away in the face of this new possibility. Naomi could barely contain herself. We're gonna make an album? She squealed. Maybe, Eli cautioned, but he was smiling too. We're gonna talk about making an album. Daddy, this is even better than the label deal. You'll get to sing your own songs your own way. She threw her arms around his neck. And I can help. I can be your manager. Eli laughed, hugging her back. My manager, huh? And what exactly would that job entail? Well, first of all, you need to eat your toast before it gets cold, she said, pulling back and putting on her serious face again. Can't have my star performer missing breakfast. As Eli picked up his slightly cold toast, he looked at his daughter's beaming face and felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time. Pure, uncomplicated joy. This wasn't just about making music anymore. This was about building something together, something that honored both his voice and his truth. The morning sun seemed brighter somehow, and even the burnt edges of the toast tasted just fine. They had a new dream now, one that felt more real than any record label's promises. It might be harder, might take longer, but it would be theirs. The Little Bean Cafe sat on the corner of Maple and 3rd, its brick walls weathered by decades of southern summers. Inside, mismatched chairs and round tables filled the cozy space, while fairy lights twinkled overhead like stars caught in mason jars. The usual scent of coffee and pastries mingled with the nervous energy of a crowd squeezed shoulder to shoulder. Eli stood in the small storage room that doubled as a makeshift green room, his hands clasped together in prayer. His black button-down shirt, freshly ironed by Naomi that morning, felt tight around his collar. Through the thin wall, he could hear the murmur of familiar voices. Mrs. Johnson from the church choir, Mr. Patterson from the hardware store, and dozens of others who'd shown up on a Thursday evening to hear him sing. Charles appeared in the doorway, his white hair neatly combed and a gentle smile on his face. Ready? I don't know about this, Eli said. adjusting his collar for the 10th time. These people know me as the guy who cleans their offices, serves their coffee, and now they'll know you as the man whose voice can lift their spirits, Charles said, placing a steady hand on Eli's shoulder. Just sing like you did in the studio, like you're singing to your grandmother. Naomi peeked around Charles, her eyes bright with excitement. She'd insisted on wearing her Sunday best, a yellow dress with white flowers that made her look older than her 10 years. Daddy, I saved you the best spot on stage, right by the window where the light looks pretty. Eli couldn't help but smile. His daughter had spent the afternoon helping the cafe owner arrange chairs and set up the small performance area, declaring herself the official stage manager. The cafe owner, Ms. Rita, stuck her head in. We're ready when you are, Eli. Place is packed tight as a jar of pickles. Taking a deep breath, Eli followed Charles and Naomi out. The crowd hushed as he made his way to the front. Someone had placed a simple wooden stool next to an old upright piano, where Brother Marcus from the church sat ready to accompany him. Eli's eyes found Naomi, who had claimed a front row seat next to Charles. She gave him 2 thumbs up, and suddenly the nervousness in his stomach settled into something calmer, more purposeful. Evening, everybody, he said into the microphone Charles had set up. Thank you for coming out tonight. This first song is one my grandmother taught me when I was about Naomi's age. It's called Wade in the Water. Brother Marcus played the opening chords, and Eli closed his eyes. He thought of summer evenings on his grandmother's porch, her voice strong and sure as she taught him the old spirituals. When he opened his mouth to sing, her spirit seemed to flow through him. Wade in the water. Wade in the water, children. His voice, deep and rich like honey over gravel, filled every corner of the cafe. The first verse was tentative, but as he felt the room lean in, something opened up inside him. By the chorus, his voice had found its full power, riding the waves of Brother Marcus's piano. Mrs. Johnson's Amen from the back of the room brought scattered chuckles, but no one took their eyes off Eli. He saw Mr. Patterson dabbing at his eyes with a napkin, and Miss Rita standing in the doorway to the kitchen, her hands clasped over her heart. When the last note faded, there was a moment of perfect silence before the applause burst out, warm and genuine. Eli felt his cheeks grow hot, but Naomi's beaming face gave him courage for the next song. This one's called Precious Lord, he announced, and Brother Marcus began the familiar introduction. This time, Eli let himself fully inhabit the song. He thought of his late wife, of hard days and harder nights, of faith that somehow kept him going. His voice carried all of it, the pain, the hope, the unwavering trust in something bigger than himself. As he sang the final verse, he noticed several people wiping their eyes. Even Charles, who'd heard him sing dozens of times in the studio, looked moved. The applause this time was accompanied by several people standing up, including Mrs. Johnson, who was openly weeping. After the performance, as people gathered around to shake his hand and pat his back, an elderly woman he didn't recognize made her way through the crowd. Her silver hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and her eyes were red from crying. "Mr. Carter," she said, taking his hands in hers, "you made me cry tonight. I haven't cried in years, not since I lost my Harold. But your voice, it reminded me that it's okay to feel, to remember, to hope." Eli squeezed her hands gently, his own eyes growing moist. "Thank you, ma'am. That means more than you know." As the woman moved away, Eli felt a tugging on his sleeve. Naomi looked up at him, pride shining in her eyes. "See, Daddy? You don't need any fancy record label. You just need to sing, and people feel it right here." She pressed her hand to her heart. Charles appeared at his side, watching the crowd still mingling and talking excitedly. "She's right, you know. What happened here tonight, this direct connection between you and these people, no record label can manufacture that." Eli looked around the cafe, at all these familiar faces, seeing him in a new light. He saw genuine emotion in their eyes, heard it in their voices as they discussed the performance. This wasn't about marketing or demographics or what would sell. This was about something pure and true, something that came straight from his soul to theirs. For the first time since Charles had stopped at that bus stop, Eli felt completely certain about his path forward. He didn't need a big label to repackage his voice or his story. He just needed to keep singing his truth, right here in his community, touching one heart at a time. The following Sunday morning, sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows of First Baptist Church, casting rainbow patterns across Eli's face as he stood before the congregation. His rich baritone filled every corner of the sanctuary with amazing grace, the notes rising and falling like waves of warmth washing over the assembled faithful. In the front pew, Naomi held up her old flip phone, recording every moment with unwavering focus. Mrs. Henderson, the church secretary, dabbed her eyes with a tissue. "That man's voice could make angels weep," she whispered to her neighbor. After the service, Pastor Matthews clasped Eli's hand. "Brother Carter, you must sing at our community outreach next weekend. The Lord has truly blessed you with a gift." Word spread quickly in their small town. By Wednesday evening, Eli found himself setting up a microphone at the weekly farmers market, surrounded by stands of fresh produce and homemade jams. The weather-beaten wooden gazebo became his stage, and curious shoppers paused their browsing to listen. "You know what this reminds me of?" Charles said, adjusting the small amplifier they'd borrowed from the church. "Those old traveling blues singers who'd set up anywhere people gathered. Raw, real music for real people." Eli smiled, remembering his grandmother's stories about those very singers. She used to say music doesn't need fancy rapping to touch a heart. The market performance drew more attention than expected. Mary Beth from the flower stand insisted Eli sing at her daughter's wedding. The owner of Pete's Diner offered him a regular Saturday morning spot. Each invitation felt like a small miracle, a step away from the crushing weight of 2 jobs and endless bills. Between performances, Eli still mopped floors and served coffee, but now customers would hum along with him or request their favorite hymns. The diner manager even set up a tip jar labeled Music Fund, though Eli tried to discourage it. Naomi attended every performance, positioning herself in different spots to capture the best angles with her phone. She'd inherited an old smartphone from her cousin last Christmas, and though its screen was cracked and its memory nearly full, she treated it like professional recording equipment. "Baby girl, you don't need to film every single song," Eli said one evening as they walked home from a community center performance. "Yes, I do," she insisted, carefully reviewing the footage. "Each one's special. Look how Mrs. Turner cried during Bridge Over Troubled Water, and did you see Mr. Rodriguez dancing with his granddaughter?" 2 weeks into what Naomi called their Carter Family Music Tour, they performed at the town's monthly block party. The evening air was sweet, with the scent of barbecue and honeysuckle, and string lights crisscrossed overhead like stars brought down to earth. Eli sang a mix of gospel, blues, and soul, while children played tag between the folding chairs. Charles stood at the back of the crowd, nodding in approval. "You're getting more comfortable up there," he said during a break. "The music's flowing more naturally." "It feels different," Eli admitted, sipping water. "Like I'm not just singing to them, but with them." That night, after Eli had fallen asleep in his armchair, exhausted from the day's performances, Naomi sat cross-legged on her bed, with her phone's glow illuminating her determined face. She'd spent hours selecting the perfect video, the one from First Baptist where her father sang, "His Eye is on the Sparrow," the same song that had first caught Charles's attention. Opening her email app, she carefully typed out 3 separate messages to local radio stations. Her tongue poked out slightly as she concentrated on making each word count. "Dear radio station, my name is Naomi Carter. I'm 10 years old, and I want you to hear my daddy sing. He works 2 jobs to take care of me, but his real gift is his voice. People say he sounds like gospel, and blues had a baby. That's what Mr. Charles says. When daddy sings, he makes people remember what hope feels like. Please listen, this is my daddy. Thank you. Naomi Carter." She attached the video file and pressed send 3 times, one for each station. Then she deleted the emails from her sent folder, tucked her phone under her pillow, and said a quick prayer. Dear God, please let somebody important hear Daddy's voice. And please don't let him be mad when he finds out what I did. Amen. From her bedroom window, she could see her father's silhouette in the porch chair, the soft sound of his humming drifting up like a lullaby. The moonlight caught the silver threading through his dark hair, and for a moment he looked just like the old photograph of her grandmother that hung in the hallway, head tilted back, lost in the music that ran through their family like lifeblood. Naomi clutched her phone tight against her chest, its case warm from use, and whispered to herself, "Somebody's got to help Daddy's voice find its way home." Then she slipped under her covers, dreams full of radio towers broadcasting her father's songs across the night sky. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the windows of Charles' home studio, where tension hung thick in the air. Eli stood in the recording booth, his hands gripping the lyric sheet a bit too tightly, while Charles leaned over the mixing board, frustration evident in the set of his shoulders. "Let's try it again," Charles said through the intercom, his voice carrying decades of professional authority. "But this time, smooth out those rough edges. Think polished crystal, not raw granite." Eli took off his headphones and stepped out of the booth, his usually gentle expression tight with concern. "Mr. Charles, with all due respect, those rough edges are part of who I am. They're the years of singing my baby girl to sleep, of praising through pain in church, of keeping hope alive when times were hard." Charles swiveled his chair to face Eli, running a hand through his silver hair. "I understand that, Eli. But the industry has certain expectations. Listeners these days." "The listeners at the farmer's market didn't seem to mind," Eli interrupted softly. "Neither did the folks at First Baptist or Pete's Diner." "That's different," Charles insisted, gesturing at the state-of-the-art equipment surrounding them. "We're talking about reaching beyond Willow Creek. This isn't just about local gigs anymore." The studio assistant, hovering in the corner with barely concealed impatience, muttered something under his breath and busied himself with adjusting cables. Charles pressed a button, and the last recording filled the room. Eli's voice rang out, deep and soulful, but now layered with electronic effects and smoothed by digital processing. It sounded professional, sleek, and somehow hollow. "Listen to that clarity," Charles said, pointing to the wavelengths on his computer screen. "That's what gets airplay." Eli shook his head slowly. "That's not me, Mr. Charles. That's not the voice my grandmother passed down. When she sang, you could hear every crack, every whisper, every hallelujah that life had taught her." Charles leaned back in his chair, studying Eli with tired eyes. "Your grandmother wasn't trying to make it in today's music business." "Maybe that's because she understood something we're forgetting," Eli said, walking over to the soundboard. He pressed play on the raw recording they'd made earlier that morning, just his voice and a simple guitar accompaniment. The unprocessed version filled the studio with something that felt more like testimony than performance. The studio assistant rolled his eyes, but Charles sat up straighter, something shifting in his expression. "You hear that?" Eli asked quietly. "That catch in my voice on the bridge? That's from the night I lost Sarah, singing hymns in the hospital until my voice gave out. And that growl in the low notes? That's every morning I got up at dawn to work 2 jobs, still believing in something better." Charles turned back to the soundboard, his fingers hovering over the controls. "The industry can be brutal, Eli. I've seen incredible talents get chewed up and spit out because they wouldn't adapt. Then maybe it's the industry that needs to change." Eli responded, his voice firm but kind. "You told me my voice could change lives. But if we polish away everything that makes it real, what's left to change anyone?" The studio fell silent, except for the soft hum of equipment. Charles stared at the mixing board for a long moment, then began adjusting knobs with deliberate movements. "How about this?" he said finally, playing back a new mix. It maintained the warmth and character of Eli's voice, while subtly enhancing the overall sound quality. "We keep the soul, but give it a frame that can travel." Eli listened intently, nodding slowly. "That's closer." but some songs need to stay completely raw. Charles drummed his fingers on the desk, thinking, what if we did both? Record 2 versions of each song, one polished for broader appeal, one stripped down for those who need to hear the whole truth. Like having Sunday best in everyday clothes, Eli mused, a small smile finally breaking through. Both real, just serving different purposes. Exactly, Charles said, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. We don't compromise your voice, we just give it different ways to reach people. They agreed to try this approach, but as they set up for the next take, both men knew they'd touched on something deeper than production values. The question of authenticity versus accessibility would remain, hovering in the background like a persistent minor chord. The studio assistant began adjusting microphone levels, his movements brusque and mechanical. Charles caught Eli's eye and gave a slight nod, acknowledgement that, while they'd found a working solution, the larger conversation was far from over. Standing in the booth again, Eli closed his eyes and thought of his grandmother, of Naomi, of all the stories woven into his voice. He would sing both versions, polished and raw, but he silently promised himself and them that he wouldn't let either one drown out the truth in his heart. The evening sun painted First Baptist Church's stained glass windows in brilliant hues of amber and purple. Inside, the wooden pews creaked with the weight of a full house. The annual fundraiser for the Children's Hospital had drawn people from all corners of Willow Creek, filling the sanctuary with a mix of familiar faces and strangers. Eli Carter stood at the edge of the stage, his palms slightly damp against his pressed black slacks. He'd performed here dozens of times before, but tonight felt different. Maybe it was because Charles sat in the third row, his presence a reminder of how much had changed since that morning at the bus stop. Or maybe it was the way Naomi had hugged him extra tight before scampering to her spot in the front pew, her old phone already poised to record. Pastor Jenkins stepped up to the microphone, his kind face beaming. Now, many of you know Brother Eli Carter. He's cleaned our floors for years, though I suspect the angels themselves couldn't do a better job. Warm laughter rippled through the congregation. But tonight, he's here to clean our souls with a song that's been in his heart since his grandmother first taught it to him. Eli walked to the center of the stage, adjusting the microphone. The lights felt warm on his face as he looked out at the crowd. His eyes found Naomi, who gave him a thumbs up, then drifted to Charles, who nodded encouragingly. This song, Eli said softly into the microphone, is called Grace Walks With Me. My grandma used to sing it while she worked in the fields, and later, while she mopped floors just like I do now. He paused, letting his words settle. She always said that grace ain't about where you are, but who walks beside you on the journey. The pianist touched the keys gently, playing the opening notes. Eli closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, he wasn't performing, he was testifying. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound, he began, his voice deep and raw with emotion. But then he took the familiar hymn somewhere new, weaving in blues, rhythms, and gospel runs that spoke of struggle and triumph, of loss and healing. In the front pew, Naomi held her phone steady, but tears streamed down her face. She watched as Mrs. Thompson from the bakery dabbed her eyes with a tissue. Mr. Rodriguez, who owned the hardware store, swayed with his eyes closed, his usual stern expression softened by the music. Eli's voice soared on the bridge, unpolished, yet perfect in its authenticity. Through many dangers, toils, and snares, the words carried the weight of personal experience, of raising Naomi alone, of working 2 jobs, of keeping faith when it would have been easier to give up. Charles leaned forward in his pew, shaking his head in wonder. This was the voice he'd heard at the bus stop, pure and unfiltered by studio equipment. This was what he'd been trying to capture. As Eli reached the final verse, something extraordinary happened. Without prompting, people began to stand. First, a few elderly women in their Sunday best, then entire families. Soon, the whole congregation was on their feet, swaying and humming along. When the last note faded, there was a moment of complete silence. Then applause erupted, punctuated by calls of "Amen" and "Sing it, Brother Eli." Mrs. Jenkins, the pastor's wife, was openly weeping, and even the teenagers in the back pews had put down their phones to clap. Pastor Jenkins returned to the microphone, wiping his own eyes. "Well, I'd planned to take up an offering now, but I think we all need a minute to collect ourselves." The congregation chuckled through their tears. After the service, people lined up to shake Eli's hand. "That wasn't just singing," an elderly deacon told him. "That was healing." Naomi bounced on her toes as she waited for the crowd to thin out. When she finally reached her father, she threw her arms around his waist. "Daddy, that was amazing. I got it all on video." Charles approached them, looking thoughtful. "Eli, that's the version we need to record. No fancy production, no artificial polish, just your truth, straight from the heart." Later that night, after Eli had gone to bed, Naomi sat cross-legged on her bed with her phone. The video was perfect. She'd captured not just her father's performance, but the way the congregation had responded. With careful fingers, she typed a simple caption, "My daddy's voice can heal hearts. Please listen and share." She hesitated only a moment before pressing upload on her social media account. Then, saying a quick prayer, she tucked herself into bed, dreaming of all the people who needed to hear her father's song. Her phone lay silent on her nightstand, its screen occasionally lighting up with notifications as the video began its journey across the digital landscape. Like a pebble creating ripples in a pond, Eli's voice started touching lives far beyond the walls of First Baptist Church, carrying his grandmother's legacy of grace to hearts that needed healing. By the time the moon set and dawn began to paint the sky, Naomi's simple act of faith had set something extraordinary in motion. The video counter ticked steadily upward through the night. 1, 0 views became 5, 0, then 10, 0, then more. Comments appeared in different languages, from different time zones, all sharing the same message. This voice had touched them, moved them, made them believe in something bigger than themselves. The morning sun streamed through the kitchen window as Eli scrubbed the last breakfast dish. His hands were rough from years of cleaning, but they moved with gentle precision through the soapy water. The viral video of his church performance had brought more attention than he'd ever expected. Local news coverage, calls from nearby churches, and a steady stream of encouraging messages from strangers. The phone rang, its sharp trill cutting through the quiet morning. Eli dried his hands on a dish towel and reached for his flip phone, expecting another local venue asking about booking. "Hello, this is Eli Carter speaking," he said, his deep voice warm but professional. "Mr. Carter," the woman on the other end spoke with infectious enthusiasm. "This is Patricia Montgomery from Hope Rising Productions. I'm calling about your incredible performance of Grace Walks with Me at First Baptist Church." Eli leaned against the counter, his heart picking up speed. Hope Rising Productions. He'd seen their name on major charity concerts and television specials. "Yes, ma'am," he replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "That video's gotten quite a bit more attention than we expected." Patricia laughed. "More than 3 million views in a week, Mr. Carter. That's not just attention, that's a movement. People are connecting with your voice in a way we rarely see nowadays. The raw emotion, the authenticity." She paused. "That's exactly what we need for our upcoming benefit concert." Eli's grip tightened on the phone. "Benefit concert?" "The annual Hope Rising Benefit Concert for Children's Healthcare. It's televised nationally on major networks, featuring both established artists and emerging voices that move people. After seeing your video, our entire production team agreed, we need your voice on that stage." The kitchen seemed to spin slightly. Eli pulled out a chair and sat down heavily. "National television?" he whispered. "Live from Atlanta," Patricia confirmed. 3 weeks from now. We'll cover all travel expenses for you, and one guest, of course. The exposure could be life-changing, Mr. Carter." But, more importantly, your voice could help us raise millions for children's hospitals across the country. Eli closed his eyes, thinking of the children's ward where his late wife had worked as a nurse. She'd always said music was the best medicine. I'd be honored, he managed. But I should mention, I'm not a professional musician. I work as a janitor, and I have responsibilities. Mr. Carter, Patricia interrupted gently. Some of the most powerful voices come from people who've lived real lives, faced real struggles. That's what makes your performance so compelling. You're not just singing about grace, you're living it. They discussed the details, the date, the rehearsal schedule, the song selection. Patricia mentioned they'd need him for 3 days, one for rehearsal, one for the dress rehearsal, and the day of the show. We'll email all the information to you, Patricia said. And Mr. Carter, thank you. Your voice is exactly what this event needs. After hanging up, Eli sat at the kitchen table, staring at the phone in disbelief. The morning sun caught the chrome finish of the refrigerator, where Naomi had proudly displayed her latest art project, a crayon drawing of him singing on a big stage with stars all around. He glanced at the clock. Naomi would be home from school any minute. His hands trembled slightly as he made her after-school snack, peanut butter and banana sandwiches, cut diagonally just the way she liked them. Right on schedule, the front door burst open. "Daddy, I'm home." Naomi's backpack thumped against the floor as she bounded into the kitchen. "Baby girl," Eli said, his voice quivering with excitement. "Come sit down for a minute. I've got some news." Naomi's eyes widened as she slid into her chair. "Is it about the video? Did something happen?" Eli took a deep breath. "You know that big charity concert they show on TV every year? The one where all those famous singers perform? The Hope Rising concert?" Naomi gasped. "We watch it every year." "Well," Eli paused, savoring the moment. "They called me today. They want me to sing on that stage." For a moment, Naomi just stared at him, her sandwich forgotten. Then she leaped from her chair with a squeal that could probably be heard 3 houses away. "Daddy, you're going to be on TV." Before Eli could respond, Naomi had grabbed his hands, pulling him to his feet. "Dance with me," she demanded, bouncing on her toes. "Like we used to with Mama." Eli laughed, letting his daughter's joy wash over him. He twirled her around the living room as she giggled uncontrollably. They danced like nobody was watching, Eli doing his old-school shuffle, Naomi adding her own creative moves. "My daddy's gonna be a star," Naomi sang, making up the tune as she went along. "Gonna sing on TV. Now, Eli chuckled, but he couldn't stop grinning. They spun around the coffee table, narrowly avoiding knocking over a lamp. "Can I come with you?" Naomi asked between twirls. "Please, please, please." "Already arranged," Eli said, dipping her dramatically. "You're my +1. Naomi's shriek of delight set them off dancing again, this time with Eli humming "Grace Walks With Me," while Naomi tried to harmonize between giggles. Finally, breathless and dizzy from laughing, they collapsed onto the worn but comfortable couch. Naomi snuggled into her father's side, still vibrating with excitement. "Daddy?" she said, looking up at him with shining eyes. "Remember what you always tell me about God's timing?" Eli smoothed her hair back from her forehead. "What's that, baby?" "That sometimes he makes us wait because he's setting up something better than we could imagine." She squeezed his hand. "I think this is one of those times." Eli pulled his daughter closer, his heart so full it felt like it might burst. The sunlight streaming through their living room window caught the dust motes dancing in the air, making them look like tiny stars swirling around them. In that moment, their small house felt like the grandest place in the world, filled with more joy than any TV studio could ever hold. The glossy double doors of the Metropolitan Concert Hall loomed before Eli, their brass handles gleaming in the morning light. He tugged at the collar of his new dress shirt, a gift from Charles who'd insisted proper rehearsal attire was essential. The fabric felt stiff and foreign against his skin, so different from his usual work clothes. Ready to meet your fellow performers? Charles asked, his eyes twinkling with excitement. He stood beside Eli in a well-tailored gray suit, looking completely at home. Eli swallowed hard. As ready as I'll ever be, I suppose. They stepped into a vast rehearsal space filled with the buzz of conversation and scattered musical notes. Professional musicians tuned their instruments, while stagehands scurried about with clipboards and headsets. The polished wooden floor stretched out beneath bright overhead lights, and a grand piano commanded the center of the room. Famous faces Eli had only seen on television milled around, chatting and laughing like old friends. A country music star in designer boots practiced scales near the window. An award-winning pop singer sat cross-legged on a chair, reviewing sheet music. "I don't belong here," Eli muttered under his breath. Charles squeezed his shoulder. "Nonsense. Your voice earned you this spot, fair and square." A tall woman in a sleek pantsuit strode toward them, her heels clicking against the floor. "Charles Whitmore. I thought I recognized that silver hair of yours." She embraced Charles warmly before turning to Eli. "And you must be Eli Carter. I'm Regina Walsh, the show's director. That video of yours had me in tears." Eli shook her offered hand. "Thank you, ma'am. I'm grateful for the opportunity." "We're thrilled to have you," Regina said. "Let me introduce you to some of the others." She led them through the room, making introductions. Some performers were genuinely welcoming, while others gave polite but distant nods. Eli couldn't help noticing how a few whispered behind their hands after he passed. The country star, Jake Thompson, stepped forward with an easy smile. "Hey there, loved your take on that old gospel number. Reminded me of my grandma's church back home." "Much obliged," Eli replied, warming to Jake's genuine manner. "Your last album got me through some long night shifts at the hotel." They chatted about music and their southern roots until Regina called everyone to attention. "All right, folks, let's run through the program order." Eli found himself scheduled near the end of the show, the spot usually reserved for standout performances. His stomach churned with equal parts pride and nervousness. As the rehearsal progressed, Eli watched the other artists perform. Their polished routines and professional confidence made him increasingly aware of his own inexperience on big stages. During breaks, Charles offered quiet guidance on microphone technique and stage presence. "Just sing it like you're back in that church," Charles advised. That's what touched people's hearts. When Eli's turn came, he stepped up to the microphone. The rehearsal hall fell silent. He closed his eyes, thinking of Naomi's face in that front pew, and began to sing. His rich voice filled the space, unadorned and honest, telling a story of faith and perseverance. When he finished, there was a moment of complete silence before applause broke out. Even some of the previously dismissive performers nodded in appreciation. Regina wiped her eyes. "That's exactly what we need. Raw, real emotion. Don't change a thing." The rest of the rehearsal passed in a blur of technical adjustments and scheduling discussions. As the session wound down, Charles beamed with pride. "You showed them what real music is about, Eli. No fancy productions needed." They gathered their things and headed toward the exit. Charles was telling a story about a nervous performer from his producing days when he suddenly stopped mid-sentence. His face went pale, and his hand flew to his chest. "Charles?" Eli asked, alarmed. The older man stumbled forward, his breathing labored. Eli lunged forward, catching him before he could fall. Charles's weight sagged against him as other performers and staff members turned at the commotion. "Somebody call an ambulance!" Eli shouted, holding his friend upright. Eli's world shifted into slow motion as Charles crumpled beside him. One moment they were laughing about Jake Thompson's thick southern drawl, and the next, Charles clutched his chest, his face contorted in pain. "Charles!" Eli caught the older man before he hit the floor. "Somebody call 911! Regina rushed over, phone already pressed to her ear. The rehearsal hall erupted in chaos. Musicians stopped playing, stagehands dropped their equipment, and several people crowded around them with worried faces. "Stay with me, Charles," Eli pleaded, supporting Charles's head. The older man's breathing came in sharp, irregular gasps. His usually ruddy complexion had turned ashen, and sweat beaded on his forehead. The paramedics arrived within minutes, their efficient movements clearing a path through the onlookers. They lifted Charles onto a stretcher, attaching monitors and speaking in clipped, urgent tones. Eli followed them out to the ambulance, his heart pounding. "I'm coming with you," he insisted, but the paramedic shook her head. "Family only, sir. We're taking him to St. Mary's Hospital." Eli watched helplessly as the ambulance doors closed, sirens wailing as it pulled away. Regina appeared at his side, car keys in hand. "Come on," she said. "I'll drive you." The ride to the hospital passed in a blur of traffic lights and worried silence. Eli's hands couldn't stay still, fidgeting with his shirt buttons, his phone, the seat belt, anything to keep from thinking about Charles's pale face and labored breathing. At the emergency room, Eli paced the waiting area while Regina made calls. Hours crawled by. Doctors rushed past without answers. The antiseptic smell and harsh fluorescent lighting made everything feel surreal. "Mr. Carter?" A nurse finally approached. "Mr. Whitmore is stable. He's had a heart attack, but we caught it in time. He's resting now." Eli's legs nearly gave out with relief. "Can I see him?" "He's sedated, but you can sit with him briefly." In the cardiac unit, Charles lay still against white sheets, connected to beeping machines. His usual commanding presence seemed diminished somehow. Eli sank into the visitor's chair, watching the steady rise and fall of Charles's chest. His phone buzzed. Regina's number. "Hello?" "Eli." Her voice sounded strained. "I need you to stay calm. The network executives just called an emergency meeting." Something cold settled in Eli's stomach. "What kind of meeting?" "They're concerned about the situation. Without Charles there to coordinate your segment." She paused. "They've decided to replace you with Madison Wells. She's got a new single coming out, and they think—" "Replace me?" The words felt like stones in his mouth. "Just like that? I fought for you, Eli, I swear. But they're worried about ratings, and Madison's team has been pushing hard for this slot. They're offering to book you for a later show, maybe next season." Eli's throat tightened. "You mean when nobody's watching anymore?" "I'm so sorry." Regina's voice cracked. "This isn't right. It isn't fair." "No," Eli agreed quietly. "It sure isn't." He ended the call, staring at Charles's unconscious form. All those weeks of preparation, the hours spent rehearsing, Naomi's excited plans for watching her daddy on TV, gone in an instant. A young nurse touched his shoulder. "Sir, visiting hours are ending soon, but there's a cafeteria on the first floor if you need somewhere to sit for a while." Eli nodded numbly, taking one last look at Charles before heading downstairs. The cafeteria was nearly empty, its harsh lighting casting long shadows across vacant tables. He bought a coffee from the tired-looking cashier and found a corner seat. The coffee grew cold in front of him as he sat there, watching his reflection in its dark surface. The new shirt Charles had bought him suddenly felt like a costume, a pretense that he could step into that glittering world of entertainment and belong. Who had he been fooling? The untouched coffee rippled slightly as Eli's hands trembled on the table. He didn't move, didn't drink, just sat there as the reality of his shattered dreams settled heavily around him like dust after a collapse. The morning sun filtered through the hospital blinds, casting thin stripes of light across Charles's bed. Eli quietly entered the room, carrying a paper cup of coffee and a small bag from the cafeteria. His shoulders ached from sleeping in the waiting room chair, but he couldn't bring himself to leave the hospital last night. Charles stirred at the sound of footsteps. His eyes opened slowly, focusing on Eli with recognition. Though still pale, some color had returned to his face. "You look terrible," Charles said, his voice raspy but carrying a hint of his usual dry humor. "Look who's talking." Eli managed a small smile, settling into the chair beside the bed. "How are you feeling?" "Like I got kicked by a mule." Charles adjusted himself against the pillows with a wince. "But the doctors say I'll live." For now, anyway. Don't talk like that, Eli said quickly. The thought of losing another person in his life made his chest tighten. Charles waved off his concern. We need to talk, Eli. I've been meaning to tell you something important. Whatever it is, it can wait until you're stronger. No. Charles's voice gained some of its old firmness. It can't. Hand me that folder from the bedside table. Eli passed him a manila envelope, worn at the edges. Charles's hands trembled slightly as he opened it, pulling out several official-looking documents. I've been updating my will, Charles said without preamble. The studio, all the equipment, I'm leaving it to you. Eli stared at him. Sure, he'd misheard. What? The whole setup, the mixing board, the instruments, the space itself, it's all yours. Charles pressed on before Eli could interrupt. I've been planning this for weeks. The paperwork's already done. Charles, I can't accept that. It's too much. Eli's voice cracked. Your family. My family hasn't spoken to me in 15 years. Charles cut in. My daughter lives in Europe, doesn't even return my calls. My son. He paused, pain flickering across his face. Well, that bridge burned long ago. But still, listen to me, Eli. Charles leaned forward, his blue eyes intense. I've spent 40 years in this business. I've worked with some of the biggest names in music. But you know what? Most of them were empty, all flash, no soul. Your voice? He shook his head. That's something real. Something pure. Eli sat back, overwhelmed. The morning light caught the dust motes, dancing between them, making the moment feel dreamlike. I made mistakes with my own family, Charles continued. Chose the wrong priorities. Maybe this is my chance to do something right. He pulled a key ring from the folder. The studio's paid off. Property taxes are covered for the next 5 years. All you need to do is walk in and start creating. I don't know what to say. Eli's vision blurred with tears. Say you'll use it. Say you won't let fear stop you from sharing that gift. A nurse appeared in the doorway, clipboard in hand. Time for your medication, Mr. Whitmore. Charles pressed the keys into Eli's palm. Promise me. Eli's fingers closed around the cold metal. I promise. Good. Charles settled back against his pillows. Now get out of here. Go make something beautiful. Eli stood, his legs unsteady. Thank you doesn't begin to cover it. Thank me by proving I was right about you. Charles's eyes were already starting to drift closed from the medication. And Eli? Yes? Tell that daughter of yours she's welcome in the studio anytime. Something tells me she's got her daddy's ear for music. Eli walked out of the hospital room, the keys heavy in his pocket. Tears rolled down his cheeks, but for the first time in years, they weren't tears of sorrow. They were tears of gratitude, of possibility, of dreams suddenly within reach. The morning sun hit his face as he stepped outside. He pulled out the keys, studying them in the light. 3 silver keys on a plain ring, no fancy keychain or label. Simple, practical, just like Charles himself. But what they represented was anything but simple. A future, a legacy, a chance to make his mark on the world. In his other pocket, his phone buzzed. It was a text from Naomi. How's Mr. Charles? Eli looked at the keys one more time before slipping them back into his pocket. His daughter's faith, Charles's belief in him, the weight of the promise he'd just made, it all swirled together in his heart, forming something new and powerful. With shaking fingers, he typed back. He's going to be okay. And baby girl, we need to talk. Something amazing just happened. The evening settled over their small house like a heavy blanket, bringing with it the familiar sounds of crickets and distant traffic. Eli sat in his favorite armchair, his gaze fixed on the acoustic guitar propped in the corner of the living room. The instrument, a weathered Gibson he'd bought years ago at a pawn shop, had gathered a thin film of dust since he'd last played it. The house felt unusually quiet. The TV remained dark, and the radio that usually filled their evenings with gospel tunes stayed silent. Even the usual clatter of dishes and running water from their post-dinner cleanup was absent, the dirty plates still stacked in the sink. The guitar's presence seemed to mock him now. Its worn, sunburst finish caught the dim light from the table lamp, reminding him of all the dreams that had slipped through his fingers. The network's rejection still stung fresh, like salt in an open wound. Naomi's soft footsteps padded down the hallway. She appeared in her pajamas, her hair wrapped in the colorful silk scarf her mother had taught her to use. She stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her father with those knowing eyes that sometimes made her seem older than her 10 years. "Daddy," she said quietly, moving into the room. "You've been sitting here for almost an hour." Eli blinked, suddenly aware of how long he'd been lost in thought. "Just thinking, baby girl. You should be getting ready for bed." Instead of heading back to her room, Naomi settled cross-legged on the floor near his feet, the way she used to do when she was smaller and wanted a story. "You're thinking about the concert, aren't you?" He nodded slowly, his throat tight. Sometimes things just don't work out the way we hope. But that doesn't mean we give up," Naomi said firmly. She glanced at the guitar, then back at her father. "Remember what you told me when I wanted to quit the school play because Jenny Thompson got the lead role?" Eli couldn't help but smile a little at the memory. Naomi had been devastated about being cast as a tree instead of Dorothy in the school's production of The Wizard of Oz. "I remember. You said faith ain't faith if you only keep it when the sun is shining." Naomi's voice took on a deeper tone, mimicking his speaking style. "You said sometimes God gives us different paths than what we expected, but that doesn't mean he's not listening." The words hit him hard, hearing his own advice reflected back at him through his daughter's voice. He looked at the guitar again, remembering the countless evenings he'd spent playing it after her mother passed, finding solace in the music when words failed him. "And remember what happened?" Naomi continued, warming to her theme. "I ended up having the best time being that tree. I got to wear all that green glitter, and my branches helped Dorothy find her way home." Eli reached out and smoothed the stray curl that had escaped from under her scarf. "When did you get so wise, baby girl?" "I learned from the best." She stood up and walked over to the guitar, running her finger along its dusty neck. "Mr. Charles gave you that studio because he believes in you, Daddy. Just like I do. Just like Mama would." The mention of her mother made Eli's heart catch. Grace had always been his biggest supporter, pushing him to share his music even when he doubted himself. She would have loved to see him in Charles's studio, would have been right there beside Naomi, cheering him on. "The network people," Naomi said, her voice growing serious, "they don't know what they're missing. But that doesn't mean other people won't want to hear you sing. Remember how many views that church video got? Those people found you all by themselves, without any fancy TV show." She was right, Eli realized. The video had spread because people connected with the raw emotion in his voice, not because of any marketing campaign or network backing. Maybe that was the real miracle. Not the big television opportunity, but the way his music had already touched people's hearts. Naomi picked up the guitar carefully, the way she'd seen him do it 100 times, and brought it over to him. "Play something, Daddy, please." Eli looked at the instrument in his daughter's hands, remembering Charles's words from the hospital. The studio wasn't just a gift, it was a responsibility, a chance to honor both Charles's faith in him and his own musical heritage. "You know what?" he said softly, taking the guitar from her. "I think maybe it's time we made some noise in this quiet house." His fingers found the familiar position on the fretboard, and he strummed a chord, the sound filling the room with warmth despite the guitar being slightly out of tune. He smiled faintly, feeling something inside him shift and settle, like pieces of a puzzle finally finding their proper place. Morning sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows as Eli stood at the counter, his old flip phone pressed to his ear. The coffee in his favorite chipped mug had gone cold, forgotten during his series of calls. "Miss Ruby, I know it's short notice," he said into the phone, his voice warm despite his nervousness. "But we're having a little concert tonight on the porch. Nothing fancy, just sharing some music. Would mean the world to have you there." Through the window, he could see Naomi on their wraparound porch, carefully untangling a box of Christmas lights she'd discovered in the hall closet. Her tongue stuck out slightly in concentration as she worked through a particularly stubborn knot. 7 o'clock? Yes, ma'am, that's perfect. Eli smiled as Miss Ruby, their elderly neighbor who'd brought them casseroles for weeks after his wife passed, enthusiastically accepted the invitation. And please spread the word to anyone you think might want to come. He ended the call and added Miss Ruby's name to the growing list on the notepad beside him. So far, 15 people had said yes, including Deacon Williams from church, 3 families from Naomi's school, and Mr. Peterson, who ran the hardware store downtown. "Daddy," Naomi called from outside, "I think we need more lights." Eli stepped onto the porch, taking in the scene. Naomi had managed to string up about half of the lights along the porch railing, but they barely covered the front section. The old wooden boards of the porch had been swept clean, and she'd arranged their 2 rocking chairs against the wall. "What do you think?" she asked, hands on her hips, as she surveyed her work. "We could ask Mrs. Martinez next door if she has any more lights, and maybe some of those paper lanterns she puts up for parties." "That's good thinking, baby girl." Eli pulled out his phone again. "I'll give her a call." Over the next few hours, their modest front porch transformed into something magical. Mrs. Martinez not only provided 3 boxes of party lights, but insisted on helping them set everything up. She brought her tall stepladder and hung strings of warm white lights in elegant swoops across the porch ceiling. "The lighting needs to be just right," she explained, adjusting a strand. "For the camera, you know." Eli nodded, though the thought of being filmed made his stomach twist. The old webcam they dug out of storage had seen better days, but Naomi insisted it would work fine for the live stream she planned to set up. By early afternoon, more neighbors started dropping by with offers to help. Mr. C's and Peterson arrived with 2 industrial work lights on stands, just in case. Miss Ruby's grandson, a college student studying film, showed up with a better webcam and a small mixing board he said would improve the sound quality. "Can't have bad audio for your big show, Mr. Carter," the young man said with a grin, setting up his equipment on a folding table they'd placed in the corner. Eli watched as his quiet plan for a simple porch performance grew into something bigger than he'd imagined. His phone kept buzzing with messages from people asking if they could come, if they could bring friends, if they could share the live stream link with family in other states. "Daddy, look what I found." Naomi emerged from the house carrying a framed photo of her mother Sarah singing in their church choir. Her bright smile seemed to light up the image. "Can we put it here?" She placed it carefully on a small side table near where Eli would be performing. Eli's throat tightened as he nodded. "That's perfect, baby girl. Mama would have loved all this." As the afternoon wore on, the porch became a hub of activity. Someone brought a large cooler filled with sodas and water bottles. Mrs. Martinez returned with a tray of her famous empanadas. Miss Ruby arrived early with 3 types of cookies, insisting performers needed sustenance. Around 6 o'clock, Eli stood in front of his bedroom mirror, adjusting the collar of his blue button-down shirt, the one Sarah had always said brought out his eyes. His hands trembled slightly as he fastened the buttons. The weight of what they were about to do settled heavily on his shoulders. "You look handsome, Daddy," Naomi said from the doorway. She changed into her favorite yellow dress, the one she wore for special occasions. "I put your guitar on its stand on the porch, and Mr. Tommy helped me set up the microphone." The sun began its descent, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Cars started appearing along their usually quiet street, and people emerged carrying lawn chairs and blankets. Some faces Eli recognized, others were strangers drawn by word of mouth or social media shares. On the porch, the strings of lights twinkled to life as dusk settled in. The setup looked professional thanks to their neighbors' contributions, proper lighting, sound equipment, and even a backdrop of fabric that Mrs. Martinez had insisted on hanging to frame the shot. Naomi sat cross-legged in front of the webcam, her face illuminated by the glow of her borrowed laptop. Her fingers flew across the keyboard as she set up the live stream, occasionally consulting the handwritten instructions Miss Ruby's grandson had left for her. "Okay, Daddy," she called out, adjusting the camera angle slightly. "I think we're almost ready. Want to do a sound check?" Eli picked up his guitar, his fingers finding their familiar places on the worn frets. The neighborhood had grown quiet, expectant, as people continued to arrive and set up their chairs on the lawn. The crowd was larger than he'd expected, spreading out across their small front yard and spilling onto the neighbors' properties. "Testing, testing," he spoke into the microphone, and his voice carried clearly through the small speakers they'd set up. The guitar rang true when he strummed a chord, the sound warm and full in the evening air. Naomi gave him a thumbs up from her position at the laptop. "The video looks good too. You can see all the lights, and the sound is coming through perfect." She squinted at the screen. "Oh wow, there are already 50 people waiting on the live stream." Eli's heart skipped a beat at that number, but when he looked out at the gathering crowd, he saw only encouraging smiles and familiar faces. Miss Ruby sat in her favorite portable chair in the front row, beaming up at him. Mrs. Martinez had positioned herself near the steps, ready to pass out empanadas. Mr. Peterson stood at the back, his height making him visible above the others, giving Eli an encouraging nod. The sun sank lower, casting long shadows across the yard. More people arrived with their chairs, settling in quietly. The porch lights created a warm, intimate atmosphere, like a cocoon of light surrounding their makeshift stage. Sarah's photo seemed to glow in its frame, her smile as bright and encouraging as ever. "The camera's all set, Daddy," Naomi said, her voice filled with pride and excitement. "Just say when you're ready." The porch lights twinkled like stars against the deepening twilight as Eli settled onto the worn wooden stool they'd brought out from the kitchen. Nearly 30 people had gathered on his front lawn, some in folding chairs they'd brought from home, others standing with cups of Miss Ruby's sweet tea in their hands. The small crowd hummed with quiet anticipation. Naomi sat cross-legged on the porch floor beside him, her laptop balanced on her knees. She'd borrowed it from her school's computer lab for the evening, promising her teacher it was for something special. The webcam they'd set up on a stack of old hymnals faced Eli, its tiny red light blinking steadily. "We're live, Daddy," Naomi whispered, her eyes fixed on the screen. 20 people watching already." Eli's hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his guitar strap. This wasn't like singing at the bus stop or even at church. Somewhere out there, invisible people were watching, waiting. He closed his eyes for a moment, remembering his grandmother's words. "When you sing from your heart, child, God does the rest." "Evening, everybody," he said softly into the microphone they'd borrowed from the church. His voice carried warm and clear through the small speaker system Mr. Peterson had helped set up. "I'm Eli Carter, and this is just a simple porch concert. Nothing fancy, just some songs that mean something to me." His fingers found the opening chords of Amazing Grace, but not the version everyone knew. This was his grandmother's version, blending the familiar hymn with an old blues melody that spoke of deeper struggles and sweeter victory. As his voice rose into the evening air, rich and raw with emotion, Naomi's eyes widened. "Daddy," she whispered excitedly. "The numbers are jumping. 200. 300. But Eli barely heard her. He was lost in the music now, his voice carrying all the weight of loss and hope he'd carried these past years. The guitar strings resonated under his fingers as he wove through the melody, adding subtle variations that made the familiar song entirely his own. "Oh my goodness," Naomi breathed, scrolling through rapidly appearing comments. "Someone from Australia says they're crying. There's people watching from England, from Brazil, from..." The crowd on the lawn had grown larger. Neighbors who hadn't been invited were drawn by the music, standing at the edge of the yard or sitting on their own porches across the street. Mrs. Martinez wiped tears from her eyes as she swayed gently to the rhythm. Eli transitioned smoothly into "His Eye is on the Sparrow," the song he'd recorded in Charles' studio. But this version was different, more intimate, more raw. His voice cracked slightly on the high notes, but that only added to its authenticity. This wasn't a polished studio recording. This was a father singing his heart out on his front porch, sharing his soul with whoever would listen. 5,000 viewers now, Naomi announced, her voice trembling with excitement. 10,000. 15. The comments scrolled by faster than she could read them. Who is this man? This is what real music sounds like. I can feel every word in my bones. Please tell me he has an album. Eli moved through his small repertoire of songs, each one carrying its own story. He sang the lullaby he'd written for Naomi when she was small, his voice tender with memory. He sang the blues song his grandfather had taught him, about keeping faith through hard times. Each song seemed to draw more viewers, more comments, more hearts appearing on the screen. 50,000, Daddy. Naomi could barely contain herself. They're sharing the link everywhere. The night had grown deeper, but nobody moved to leave. The porch lights cast a warm glow over everything, creating an intimate circle of light and music that somehow reached through screens to touch hearts around the world. Mrs. Peterson from next door had brought out cookies, passing them through the crowd. Someone had set up a coffee station on the sidewalk. For his final song, Eli chose the one he'd been humming at the bus stop that fateful morning, the one that had caught Charles's attention. His fingers picked out the gentle introduction, and then his voice rose, carrying all the gospel and blues of generations before him. The viewer count continued to climb. 70,000, 80,000, 90,000. He sang about morning light breaking through darkness, about faith that persists through storms, about love that never dies. His voice soared and dipped, carrying every triumph and heartbreak he'd ever known, every dream he'd pushed aside and every hope he still held. As he reached the final verse, Naomi's eyes grew wide. 100,000, Daddy, she whispered, but Eli was lost in the song's last notes, his voice fading gently into the night air like a prayer. The final note hung there, suspended in the glow of the porch lights, before dissolving into silence. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The only sound was the soft chirping of crickets and the distant whisper of wind in the trees. The morning sun filtered through the kitchen curtains as Eli stood at the counter, stirring his coffee with mechanical movements. His mind was still trying to process the events of last night's porch concert. The simple wooden stool and borrowed equipment remained on the porch, a reminder that it hadn't been a dream. Naomi burst into the kitchen, still in her pajamas, clutching the borrowed laptop. Daddy, Daddy, you have to see this. Her voice trembled with excitement as she placed the computer on the kitchen table. Look at all these messages. Eli leaned over her shoulder, squinting at the screen. The video of his porch concert had exploded overnight. The view counter showed over 2 million views, and comments flooded the chat section in various languages. His phone buzzed again. It had been doing that all morning. This time it was a text from Charles's daughter. Dad's watching the replay in his hospital room. He says he knew you had it in you. And look at this, Daddy. Naomi clicked on another tab, showing a donation page someone had set up during the live stream. The number made Eli's coffee cup freeze halfway to his lips. Over $15,000 in small donations from viewers around the world. A knock at the door startled them both. Through the window, Eli could see a woman in a pressed suit holding a microphone, and behind her, a man with a camera balanced on his shoulder. More cars were pulling up along their usually quiet street. Local news, Eli muttered, running a hand over his face. Baby girl, go get dressed for school. But Daddy, school first, he said firmly, though he couldn't help smiling. Some things don't change, no matter how many views we get. As Naomi hurried to her room, Eli's phone rang again. This time, it was Pastor Richardson from church. Brother Eli, you're trending on every social media platform. They're calling you the porch prophet of blues gospel. The whole internet is talking about how your voice brought them to tears. Eli sank into a kitchen chair, overwhelmed. More knocks came at the door, different reporters now, their voices carrying through the thin walls. His phone kept buzzing with notifications, messages, and calls from numbers he didn't recognize. Miss Ruby from next door came through the back door without knocking, as she'd done for years. "Eli Carter, your yard is full of news people, and you won't believe what they're saying about you online." She waved her tablet at him excitedly. "Miss Ruby, I don't even know what to say to them," Eli admitted, gesturing toward the front door where the knocking continued. "Well, good thing I brought reinforcements then." Miss Ruby opened the back door again, revealing her son Marcus, who worked in public relations. He stepped in, already typing on his phone. "Mr. Carter, let me help you handle this," Marcus said, his professional demeanor softening with a warm smile. "We need to make sure your story gets told right." Over the next hour, Marcus helped Eli craft a simple statement for the press. They set up a proper email account to handle incoming messages and enlisted Miss Ruby's teenage granddaughter to help manage social media responses. Naomi came back downstairs, dressed for school but practically vibrating with excitement as she watched Marcus talk to the reporters outside. Through the window, Eli could see the small crowd of journalists now gathered on his front lawn, right where his neighbors had sat listening just hours before. His phone buzzed again, this time with an email notification that made his heart skip a beat. The sender was Roots Soul Records, an independent label known for its artist-first approach and diverse roster. With trembling fingers, Eli opened the email. "Dear Mr. Carter, your porch concert performance last night moved our entire team to tears. We believe your voice is exactly what the world needs right now, authentic, soulful, and uncompromising. Our label was founded by artists who, like you, refuse to let their voices be shaped by corporate interests. We would be honored to offer you a recording contract with full creative control over your music. Our label believes in preserving the raw authenticity that makes each artist unique. You would have final say over everything from song selection to production style. We're not the biggest label, but we promise something more valuable than a massive advance. We promise to let Eli Carter be Eli Carter. Would you be interested in meeting to discuss this opportunity? Warmest regards, Maya Richardson, Founder, CEO, Roots Soul Records." Eli read the email 3 times, each time feeling more real than the last. He looked up to find Naomi watching him intently, her backpack slung over one shoulder. "Good news, Daddy?" she asked softly. He turned the laptop so she could read the email. Her eyes grew wide as she scanned the words, and then she threw her arms around his neck. "See?" she whispered in his ear. "God doesn't just hear prayers at the bus stop. He hears them on porches too." Outside, the reporters were still waiting. His phone was still buzzing. The world was still spinning faster than he could keep up with. But in that moment, holding his daughter and reading those words, "Let Eli Carter be Eli Carter," he felt something settle in his soul. For the first time since that morning at the bus stop, he knew exactly what his next step would be. Miss Ruby appeared at his elbow with a fresh cup of coffee. "Well?" she asked, having read the email over his shoulder. "What are you going to tell them?" Eli looked at the porch through his window, where the morning sun was hitting the old wooden stool just right, making it glow like it was meant for something special all along. "I'm going to tell them yes," he said quietly. "But first, I need to get my daughter to school." The morning light streamed through the glass panels of Charles's studio, casting warm patterns across the hardwood floors. Eli stood in the vocal booth, headphones pressed against his ears, while Naomi sat in the control room, perched on a high stool that made her feet dangle. The space felt different now, both familiar and new. Charles's personal touches were still everywhere. The vintage microphones mounted on the walls, the worn leather couch where he used to sit, and the collection of old vinyl records that lined the shelves. But now there was also a small basket of Naomi's homework in the corner and Eli's thermos of coffee on the mixing board. "Ready when you are, Daddy," Naomi called through the intercom, her voice carrying the authority of someone twice her age. She'd spent the last few weeks learning the basics of the recording equipment from YouTube tutorials, determined to help her father make this album happen. Eli adjusted the microphone stand, his hands steady despite the emotion building in his chest. This wasn't just any recording session, this was the first song for his debut album. The independent label had given him complete creative control, just as they'd promised, and he'd chosen to start with the song that meant the most to him. "Let's do a sound check," he said, watching Naomi nod seriously as she adjusted some levels on the board. She might not understand everything about the equipment yet, but her enthusiasm made up for any technical gaps. Eli closed his eyes and hummed a few notes, feeling the familiar resonance in his chest. This was the song he'd been singing when Charles first heard him at the bus stop, an old gospel blues tune his grandmother had taught him, the same one he'd sung to his wife during their courtship, and later to Naomi as a baby. "Levels look good," Naomi announced, though Eli suspected she was mostly copying phrases she'd heard Charles use. Her face was pressed close to the monitors, studying the dancing lights with intense concentration. The first few takes were good but not quite right. Eli could feel something holding him back, perhaps the weight of the moment, the knowledge that this recording would be permanent, would carry his voice across the world. During a break, Naomi brought him a glass of water. "Tell me about when you used to sing this to Mama," she said softly, sitting cross-legged on the floor beside him. Eli's throat tightened. She loved this song. Used to say it reminded her of summer evenings on her grandma's porch. He took a sip of water, remembering. "First time I sang it to her was at the county fair. We were waiting in line for cotton candy, and she just turned to me and said, 'Sing something,' right there in public." "Did you?" Naomi's eyes sparkled. "Sure did. Scared half the people in line, but your mama just smiled that beautiful smile of hers." Eli chuckled softly. "She always knew exactly what I needed, whether it was a push or a gentle word." Naomi squeezed his hand. "She'd be so proud of you, Daddy. I know it." Eli nodded, unable to speak for a moment. When he finally stood up to return to the booth, something had shifted inside him. The next take was different. His voice carried all the joy and pain, all the love and loss, all the faith that had brought him to this moment. The notes filled the studio, rich and deep, telling a story that went beyond words. Through the glass, he could see Naomi wiping tears from her cheeks, but her smile never wavered as she watched the levels on the board. When the last note faded, the studio fell into a profound silence. Eli kept his eyes closed for a moment longer, feeling the presence of everyone who had helped him reach this point. His grandmother's lessons, his wife's unwavering belief, Charles's guidance, and Naomi's fierce determination. "Daddy," Naomi's voice came through the intercom, thick with emotion. That was perfect. Eli stepped out of the booth, and Naomi ran to meet him. As he wrapped his arms around her, he whispered, "This one's for your mama." The modest auditorium of the Willow Creek Community Center buzzed with anticipation. Every seat was filled, and people lined the walls, some holding handmade signs decorated with quotes from Eli's songs. The space wasn't glamorous, just simple wooden floors, plain walls, and basic stage lights. But tonight, it felt magical. Backstage, Eli adjusted his navy blue button-down shirt, the one Naomi had picked out for him at the thrift store last month. His hands weren't shaking anymore before performances, but his heart still raced with that familiar mix of excitement and gratitude. "5 minutes, Mr. Carter," a young stagehand called out, peeking through the curtain. Eli nodded, taking a deep breath. Through a gap in the curtain, he could see the crowd settling in. Church members who'd supported him from the start sat next to newcomers who'd discovered him through the viral porch concert. His co-workers from the hotel and diner had front-row seats. They'd insisted on buying tickets even though he'd offered them free passes. The lights dimmed, and a hush fell over the audience. The event organizer, a local woman named Sarah, stepped onto the stage with a microphone. "Tonight's proceeds will help build our town's first community music school," she announced, her voice warm with pride. "And who better to headline this event than someone who reminds us that music has the power to heal, unite, and lift spirits. Please welcome Eli Carter. The applause was thunderous. Eli stepped onto the stage, guitar strap across his shoulder, and approached the microphone. The spotlight felt warm on his face, but it wasn't blinding like the harsh TV studio lights had been. This felt right, intimate, real, connected. His eyes found Naomi in the front row, wearing her favorite yellow dress and the biggest smile he'd ever seen. She gave him 2 thumbs up, just like she used to do when he practiced in their living room. "Good evening, family," Eli said, his deep voice filling the room. The word family came naturally, because that's what this crowd had become. Some of you were there that first night at May's Cafe, when I could barely hold the guitar pick straight. Gentle laughter rippled through the audience. Some of you found me through that porch concert, and some of you— he paused, smiling at his daughter. "Some of you believed in this dream before I dared to believe in it myself." He strummed the first chord, and the audience leaned forward in their seats. This wasn't just another charity event, it was a homecoming. The opening notes of Morning Light filled the auditorium. It was the song that had started it all, the one he'd been humming at the bus stop that fateful morning. But now it had evolved, enriched by months of performing and the confidence that came from owning his voice. When morning light breaks through the rain, and hope comes rising up again, I hear your voice, so sweet and clear, telling me that love is near. Naomi's voice joined his on the chorus, just as it had countless times during their kitchen concerts. But she wasn't alone. Other voices throughout the audience joined in, creating a spontaneous choir that filled every corner of the room. Between songs, Eli shared stories about his grandmother who taught him to sing, about his late wife who always believed in his gift, about the strangers who became friends through music. Each story connected with someone in the audience. He could see it in their nodding heads and misty eyes. The set list included songs from his newly released album, recorded in what was now his studio. Each song carried pieces of his journey, the struggles, the doubts, the moments of breakthrough. But they weren't just his stories anymore. They belonged to everyone who'd been part of this unlikely path. Halfway through the show, he spotted Charles in the back row, looking frail but happy in his wheelchair. The older man had insisted on being discharged from the hospital for this performance. Their eyes met, and Charles gave him a knowing nod, the same one he'd given that first day at the bus stop. As Eli moved through his set, he noticed how the audience swayed together, how strangers held hands during the emotional ballads, how parents lifted their children to see better. This wasn't the national TV appearance he'd once dreamed of, but it was something more meaningful, a community brought together by music and hope. For the final song, Eli unplugged his guitar and stepped away from the microphone. "This one needs no amplification," he said, moving to the edge of the stage. "It's called Faith Ain't Faith, and it was written on my front porch with a very wise 10-year-old. The audience quieted, leaning in to catch every acoustic note. Naomi stood proudly in the front row, mouthing the words she'd helped write. Around her, people pulled out their phones, the small lights creating a galaxy of stars in the dimmed auditorium. Faith ain't faith if you only keep it when the sun is shining. Truth ain't truth if you hide it when the road gets winding. His voice, pure and unfiltered, carried to the very back of the room. The song built gradually, and by the final chorus, Naomi was leading the audience in harmony, her clear voice soaring above the others. She knew every word, every pause, every subtle change in the melody, not just because she'd helped write it, but because she'd lived it alongside him. The morning air was crisp, carrying the familiar scent of magnolia blossoms and fresh-cut grass. Eli Carter stood at the same bus stop where his journey had begun exactly 1 year ago, but everything else had changed. His worn jacket had been replaced by a warm leather coat, a gift from his first album's earnings. Next to him sat a well-loved guitar case, decorated with stickers from various venues where he'd performed. Naomi bounced on her toes beside him, clutching both their bus passes and a folder containing Eli's touring schedule. Her backpack was covered in music-themed pins now, each one collected from a different show. She'd grown an inch taller over the year, but her eyes still held that same unwavering faith in her father. "Can you believe it's been exactly a year, Daddy?" Naomi asked, running her finger along the laminated tour schedule. "Look at all these places we're going to visit." Eli smiled, watching the early morning sunlight paint the sidewalk gold. "Sometimes I still think I'm dreaming," he admitted, adjusting the strap of his guitar case. "Remember how scared I was to call Mr. Charles that first time?" "You were so nervous," Naomi giggled, pulling her jacket closer against the morning chill. "You practiced what you were going to say like 5 times in the mirror." A few other regular bus riders gathered at the stop, familiar faces who'd witnessed Eli's transformation from quiet janitor to local celebrity. Mrs. Jenkins, the retired librarian, waved from her usual bench. "My granddaughter in Atlanta bought tickets to your show next month," she called out proudly. Eli nodded gratefully, still amazed at how life had unfolded. The upcoming tour wasn't massive, mostly small venues in neighboring states, but it was more than he'd ever dared to dream. The independent label had kept their promise about creative control, letting him record songs that stayed true to his gospel blues roots. "Did you pack your lucky handkerchief?" Naomi asked, going through her mental checklist. She'd appointed herself his unofficial manager, keeping track of everything from performance schedules to his favorite throat lozenges. "Yes, ma'am," Eli chuckled, patting his pocket. The handkerchief had belonged to his grandmother, the same one who'd taught him the songs he now performed. "Got my vitamins too, before you ask." A cool breeze rustled through the trees, carrying scattered leaves across the sidewalk. The bus stop looked different now. Someone had installed a small bench with a roof, and the schedule board was no longer faded. Little changes, like the town itself, was growing alongside Eli's dreams. "Remember what you told me that night on the porch?" Naomi asked, her voice softening. "About giving away your voice?" Eli nodded, remembering those dark hours of doubt. "I said if I gave away my voice, there'd be nothing left of me. And now look." Naomi spread her arms wide, gesturing to the guitar case, the tour schedule, the future spreading out before them. "You kept your voice, and it's taking us places." A young mother with 2 small children approached the bus stop, her eyes lighting up with recognition. She whispered something to her kids, who stared at Eli with wide-eyed wonder. He'd gotten used to this kind of attention around town, but it still felt surreal. Eli checked his watch, a simple digital one, nothing fancy. Success hadn't changed his practical nature. They had just enough time before the bus arrived for him to review the day's schedule. Morning classes for Naomi, a radio interview for him at noon. Then rehearsal with his small backing band in Charles's old studio, now officially his. Charles had recovered from his heart attack and often stopped by the studio to listen and offer advice. Their friendship had deepened, transcending their initial roles of mentor and protege. Last week, Charles had brought his grandchildren to watch Eli record, telling them, "This is what real music sounds like." The morning sun climbed higher, warming the air. Other commuters began arriving, the usual mix of factory workers, office staff, and students. Some nodded in recognition, others smiled politely. Eli had insisted on keeping their regular routine despite his growing success. "Keeps us grounded," he'd told Naomi. "Oh," Naomi suddenly exclaimed, pulling out her phone. "The radio station in Memphis posted about your upcoming show. The comments are so nice." She scrolled through them, reading select ones aloud. "Listen to this one. His voice reminds me of my grandfather's church choir. Can't wait to hear him live." Eli smiled, touched by the comment. His music had always been about connection, reaching across generations, across experiences, across divides. Every song carried echoes of Sunday mornings in his grandmother's kitchen, of his late wife's favorite hymns, of Naomi's childhood lullabies. The familiar rumble of an approaching bus caught their attention. Naomi quickly tucked her phone away and grabbed her backpack. The morning sun glinted off the bus's windows as it turned the corner, right on schedule. Something about the moment, the quality of light, the peaceful anticipation, reminded Eli of that fateful morning a year ago. Without thinking, he began to hum the same old gospel blues tune that had caught Charles's attention. The melody rose soft and clear in the morning air, as natural as breathing. Naomi's face lit up with recognition. She squeezed his hand and said, grinning, "Sing it louder. Daddy, you never know who's listening." What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below, and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you thought this was just the beginning, you're right. Click through and see where the story takes you next. If you enjoyed the story of Eli Carter, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.